right, this is lecture 2 for unit 1. We're going to talk about the Southern Colonies today. Remember, we talked about 3 different colonial regions, or I mentioned there are 3 different regions we talked about. The South, the Middle, and New England. Well, we started with Jamestown and Plymouth, or Plymouth, Massachusetts. Last night, now we're going to go into the Southern Colonies as a whole. First, we'll do a little bit of review together, and then we'll move on. What problems did European settlers face in the New World? When we look at this, it's Jamestown in particular, and even Plymouth. When we get there, they're going to face Native American attack, hunger, starvation, disease, hardship from the weather. It'll be a little different in Jamestown. And in Plymouth, they came with their families, if you remember, and came to settle permanently. Jamestown, of course, they came looking to get rich. So there was different motivations and different actions when they first got here. We've expanded upon this in class, or I hope to expand upon it some more tomorrow. What colonists in Jamestown saved the others from starvation? John Smith, right? You don't work, you don't eat, was his motto. He forced those townsmen and the lazy people there to get off their butts and do some planting and hunting. The crop that saved the Virginia Company. Remember when I asked you who founded Jamestown? It's the Virginia Company of London. They got the charter from the king, the permission to found Jamestown. It's a business. So John Rolfe created or helped to form a viable strain of tobacco that was commercial. So tobacco is the saving crop. John Rolfe is the guy who introduces it. The big farms are plantations, and who worked on them initially would be indentured servants, okay, and then later on slaves. Slaves were introduced to Jamestown in 1619. Right, there's very few dates throughout the course that I ask you to specifically remember. Okay? 1607, founding of Jamestown is certainly one. 1492. When Columbus discovers America, in 1619. So this unit right away we have to put 1619, the slaves come to the Americas, or at least to the English colonies. 1607 we have the founding of Jamestown, and 1492 Columbus discovers America. Okay? The first legislative body in English colonies, legislative body is law making. The legislative branch makes the laws. Okay? That's the House of Burgesses in Virginia. Okay, representative democracy, which we'll talk about a little more today and in class. Okay, so we're going to start with the Southern Colonies. Okay, the first group in the South here, but because Jamestown is founded in 1607, and it's the first permanent English settlement. Not the first attempt, remember, Roanoke was an attempt earlier. Jamestown's the first permanent settlement, lasting. All right, there are going to big SOL things first, some things to understand. Big ideas. Economic and political institutions in the colonies develop in ways that are either typically European or distinctively American. These are broad things that they brought us from the state, big broad ideas. Okay? As climate, soil condition, and other natural resources shaped the economic development of each colonial region. All right, so the climate, the soil, all right, other natural resources shape the way or what the colonists do for a living in each region. That makes sense, right? And it's especially important when we discuss New England, because you're going to write a little bit on that, quite a bit on it. All right, the African slave trade and the development of slave labor systems in many of the colonies resulted from plantation economies and labor shortages. All right, and that's something we'll go into in more detail both in this lecture and in class. All right, questions to keep in mind as we go through the PowerPoint. How did the economic activity and political institutions of the 3 colonial regions reflect the resources or the European origins of their settlers? Keep in mind, many and most of the colonists early on are English, okay, with the rights of English. And the ideas found in the English Bill of Rights and the English Constitution and Magna Carta, they have a history that they build upon. Okay? Why was slavery introduced into the colonies? To understand why. And how did the institution of slavery influence European and African life in the colonies. Okay. So those are the questions to keep in mind as we're going through the PowerPoint. Those are some of the big ideas that the state says we need to know in the SOLs. Okay. So the Southern Colonies, five of the original 13 are Southern, kind of, because Maryland bounces back and forth, and we'll expand on that a bit too. Economically, it's like the South. It's got plantation and slave labor, all right? But religiously, we see some toleration and development of some urban centers like Baltimore. Okay, so 5 of the original 13 were called Southern. Virginia, Maryland, most of the time, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The number one reason for settlement in the South is economic opportunity. Okay? The chance to start over, the chance to make a new life, the chance to change your social status. All right, so that's the number one reason in the South. We're going to look at New England. We know Plymouth and Massachusetts. Plymouth colony is absorbed into Massachusetts Bay colony. That's religious freedom. So then when we look at the middle, it's a combination of the two. All right. The Anglican Church, or Church of England, is the main church in the South. All right, so the South keeps a strong allegiance to the Anglican Church, which today is the Episcopalian Church. All right, much closer ties to England than among the Southern, or at least the wealthy Southern elite. Okay, much closer. We're going to look then at Maryland, and we're going to use a couple different terms to describe colonies, so we don't go into this in great detail. We have the proprietary colony. A proprietor is an owner, okay? Somebody that owns the colony outright. So Lord Baltimore founds Maryland, and it's his colony to do with as he wishes. So he founds Maryland as, or creates it, as a haven or a safe place for Catholics. Okay, so Maryland is established by Lord Baltimore as a haven for Catholics because they had been persecuted in England. Remember, as this is going on, the Reformation's occurring. Henry VIII gets split from the Catholic Church, not over principle, but because he wanted a divorce, which we probably talked about or will talk about more in class. Okay. One of the things I want us to remember about Maryland, and we don't go into great detail of each individual colony, but each of them have something of importance that we discuss in it. In 1649, Maryland passes the Toleration Act. And it's our first example, our first step towards religious freedom. Now, it doesn't grant everybody religious freedom or freedom of religion. It's only for Christians, those who believe in Christ. If you don't believe in Christ in Maryland in 1649, you can still be put to death. But it's a baby step. It's a small step towards where we get to today. And in this class and in most of history, what we look at, we don't make giant leaps of progress. We make small steps. So this is an important stepping stone towards today. When the Carolinas then are royal colonies. They're under the control of the king. So we have proprietary colonies where there's an owner, like Lord Baltimore, and royal colonies where they get a royal charter, they still have the rights of Englishmen. The king, though, appoints a governor and a council. Okay? So he controls the colony, they answer to the colony. The Carolinas grow food for the West Indies. Okay? They get very wealthy doing so. Okay? They grow very rich. South Carolina more so than North Carolina because it has better harbors. Charleston, a matter of fact, in South Carolina, will be the main city in the South for quite some time, the largest city. Remember that. That's some of the trivia they like in the SOL. So I'm looking for, they ask, where's a big city in the South? It's Charleston for quite some time. Okay? Probably up until near the Civil War when New Orleans will take over. All right. So we go on to life in the South. Or Georgia first, I guess. We're not going to go into Virginia in great detail here because we covered it in Jamestown in the last lecture. So Georgia is founded, it's by James Oglethorpe. It's the last of the original 13 colonies, and it's got two purposes. Oglethorpe goes to the king, first king says, let me found Georgia with debtors. It used to be, if you owed money, you could be put in prison until your debts were paid off. So a lot of English prisons were overflowing with people who owed money that were poor, couldn't pay their debts, and never would be able to. So this was a chance for a second start, a new start for them, and the king agrees. So Georgia's going to be filled with debtors, people out of the prisons. And they're willing to do this, the people, for a new chance, a new start at life, a change in status. And the government, the king, and leaders in the South are willing to take it because Florida is owned by Spain, and Spain and England are at war on and off for a long, long time. So this will give a buffer or protection to the Carolinas. Georgia will be the first blow. All right, Spain can't get to South Carolina without going through Georgia. So it's the first line of defense. At least that's what the intent is. All right, so some similar or common characteristics of life in the South. If we look at the South overall, social status in the South is going to be based on how long your family has been here and how much land they have, how wealthy they are. So how long have you been here, how far back can you trace your name, and how much land you own, how wealthy you are. All right, and in the South, most of the people will be English or of Scots-Irish descent. And I'll go into what Scots-Irish is. It's common. We'll get into that. Okay. Life in the South, we have large landholders. In the eastern lowlands dominate colonial government. Remember, the South develops representative democracy. We do this here because we're spread out on large plantations. There's not a lot of roads. We use the rivers for transportation to get our crops to market. Not a lot of time to drop everything or ease of going to where decisions are going to be made. So we elect representatives to go for us, so we don't have to take the time off. All right, so we have representative democracy. So generally then, only the wealthy have the time and leisure to participate. So the colonial legislatures are going to be dominated by the upper class, the elite, early on. Okay, they'll have the power. In the mountains and valleys, further inland, society is going to be characterized by trading, subsistence farming. Remember, subsistence farming is just growing enough for your family to survive. You're not growing enough to sell. Hunting, and that's where we'll find the Scots-Irish, here in the valley, in the Appalachian Mountains. All right, we'll know the economy becomes plantation, cash crop oriented. They'll grow things such as tobacco, rice, indigo. Indigo is a plant that they create a purple dye out of. All of those for export to the Caribbean or to Europe for profit. And we'll see development of a strong idea and belief in private ownership and free enterprise. The growth of this plantation and agricultural-based economy in the high and coastal lowlands of the Southern Colonies requires a lot of cheap labor. Very labor-intensive, and it's large scale, so we need a lot of labor. Some of the early labor needs, especially in Virginia and Maryland, are going to be met with indentured servants. Okay? These are often poor people from England, Scotland, or Ireland who agreed to work on a plantation for a period of time in return for their passage over. Usually the contract's about 7 years, okay? And you'll work, the person who's here pays for your voyage over. You get a free passage. You have to work for 7 years. At the end of that term, you'll get 50 acres. That's a good chunk of land. The problem is early on in the Virginia colony, the mortality rate is somewhere near 90%. Right? So it's not an easy life. Not many people live out their indenture. Okay, so most don't survive to the end of the term. Eventually, we'll see a shift from indentured to slavery. And there's a number of reasons to that. The slave will not get its freedom. Okay, you don't have to give it 50 acres. You don't have to pay a slave's passage. So most of the South's labor needs then are going to shift from indentured to slaves. Even though some of the early Africans came over as indentured servants, we'll see a shift. We'll see a shift in that to forced lifetime servitude. Especially the beginning in Virginia and Maryland, where slavery becomes permanent and race-based. Okay, so initially more and more Africans are going to be taken from their homes and brought to the New World. That journey over is called the Middle Passage. right? It's part of what we call triangular trade. All right, so you're trying to trade, of course, there's 3 points: the New World, the Old World, and Africa. The Middle Passage is that journey from Africa to the New World, and it's horrific. They stack slaves up like cordwood. They barely let them out, barely enough from the water to survive, and they bring them here for a life of service. Okay. The development of this slavery-based economy eventually will be one of the leading causes of the Civil War later on.